I'm Dan. I don't usually get on the podium here, but I'm kind of filling in for Kevin and also doing or continuing the Revelation study. The rapture has obviously happened. No one's in the audience here, so I just figured it would be a good time to start with chapter 12. No, I'm kidding. There's some people here, so, but yeah, left behind. But we do obviously live in interesting times. There is a war going on, and I work for a defense contractor, and so we have what are called deployed field representatives that are close to it, and obviously there's what they show you on the news, and then there's like the actual. I hesitate to say battlefield because it's across the what is it called, the Strait of Hormuz, or past that there's the Red Sea, or it's that strait of water that leads right into Kuwait, where we have different bases and stuff. But it's definitely interesting. Obviously this is a time where you got to be careful with what you hear on the news versus what's reality versus what you're taught in the Bible. So I think it's a good start here that we begin in Revelation 12. So last week, Pastor Kevin, covered the seals, the trumpets, and the bowls. And the point of the study is to show that, not all of them will occur serially in that 7-year period. When you read through Revelation, it doesn't, some people take it like they all happen in sequence. Other people think that there's parallel activity between the seals and bowls, and other people think that they're completely stacked on top of one another. So going through this, and I'm sure Kevin had the same thing, is that there's theory upon theory upon theory. But what I'm going to try to do tonight is just read Scripture, try to interpret it the best that I can for you, and God willing that I have ears to hear and a mouth to speak, and likewise for yourselves. So, all right. So turn to Revelation 12, and we're going to read verses 1 through 17. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. If you can, turn to slide 2, I think. Slide 3. There we go. Now a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them down to earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child. Child is capitalized, as soon as it was born. She bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, while she has a place prepared by God. They should feed her there for 1,260 days. That's about 3.5 years. Verse 7. And a war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. But they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Then I heard with a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brethren, who accused them before our God day and night, has been cast down. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and they did not love their lives to the death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. Now when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. But the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Time and times and half a time, you're going to find that kind of dialogue in Daniel Again, that translates to 3.5 years. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened his mouth and swallowed up the flood with the dragon, which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Verse 17, and the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So that was a lot of symbology. That was a mixture of a battle taking place in space and time that we can't comprehend. That's the battle with dragon and God's angels. And then it goes back to earth. And you'll notice that there's some passage in there that kind of mirror, if you've read the book of Daniel. We have Psalm 2 in there when it talks about the child shall rule the nations with a rod of iron. But first, let's talk about the woman with the 12 stars. Why a woman and why 12 stars? I'll start with the 12 stars. It's the tribes of Israel. There's 12 tribes of Israel. So if you go to Genesis 37, 9 through 10, Joseph has a dream, and this is part of the reason why his brothers persecuted him and sold him to slavery to Egypt, is that he had a dream of 11 stars bowing down to him. Why 11? Because Joseph is the 12th. And then why is it a woman? It's not uncommon for, as we read through Revelation, we are the bride of Christ. So we're referred to as a she. When we go to heaven, whether we die naturally and go to heaven and we meet Jesus, we become the bride of Christ. After the tribulation, we become the bride of Christ. So we're referred to as a she, and also Israel is often referred to as a she. Even in a bad tense, like when Israel betrays God, goes after false gods, goes after Baal. In passages in the Old Testament, Israel is often referred to as a harlot. And that term harlot is going to come back in Revelation. So we have the 12 stars, the 12 tribes of Israel. We have the woman, which represents just the Jewish people in general. And you also have the woman pregnant with child. In my Bible, child is capitalized. The child is Jesus. He goes to rule all of the nations. In verse 6, you have that she fled into the wilderness. Well, she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. So again, you're kind of jumping back and forth between time where Jesus is born, he rules and he reigns, but then all of a sudden the woman needs to flee into the wilderness. And this is part of the reason why some people think that the woman is Mary, and this is after Jesus gets crucified and Mary flees, but that's not the case. The woman is the Jewish people, and some people that say that the woman is the Jewish culture, the Jewish people. The wilderness is actually outside of Israel. So by this time, we're kind of at the midpoint of the tribulation. The Antichrist is making his appearance, and the Jewish people that know the signs of the times, they start to flee. And people believe that they actually flee into Jordan, into an area called Petra. Petra is the area where they filmed, I think it's The Last Crusade, where they have this city carved out into rock. There's no complete biblical basis for that. It does mention in, I think it's, let's see here, Daniel 11:41. So I'm going to jump back there real quick here. So Daniel 11:41. Daniel 11:41, it's talking about the end times, Daniel's 70th week, and in verse 41, he shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Adam. One of those implies that it's in the area of Jordan, and again, a lot of people connect wilderness to Petra, this particular area in Jordan. So the next verses describe the dragon as having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 diadems. Diadems are different from crowns. Diadems are like tiny crowns. They don't cover your full head, but we'll kind of get into that a little bit later because it's a little complicated. We'll go into Daniel, but the next thing that happens is this war that breaks out in heaven. And Michael, who is an archangel, he appears in the Bible a couple of times, he fights Satan and he casts him down. And it's told that he takes a third of the angels with him, a third of the stars. Stars are often referred to as angels. So this is this cosmic battle that takes place where Satan is cast down onto earth during the tribulation. Now, you might think like, well, wait, Satan made war with God. He was in heaven. He was the accuser of people. If you go into Job, what's some of the first verses in Job? It's Satan and God talking about Job. And Satan accuses Job and says, like, you're protecting him. He has all this stuff. You know, if you take it away from him, like, he'll curse you. So you have to think about, like, up until that point, Satan could be in an area near God or something of that sort, accusing us, the brethren, the good Christians of this earth that follow Jesus, almost like a big courtroom. You have a prosecutor and a defendant, and in between them is, for believers, is Jesus. I think I follow some YouTube channels where they have, near-death experiences. And you got to take some of them with a grain of salt, but there's a couple where it's almost like they go to heaven and they almost have this trial and they think they're being condemned and Jesus comes and saves them. And they're being condemned not by God, but by evil, by Satan, by some demonic force that is going against them. So again, I kind of think of it like that way. I'm sure it's probably something different, but yeah, biblically, the Satan is called the accuser of the brethren. So we covered the woman, we covered the stars, we covered the cosmic battle that happened. We covered that the angels were thrown down with him. So during this time of the tribulation, we hope we're gone. I'm not going to get too much into whether we're going to go out pre-trib or mid-trib or post-trib or partial trib or no trib rapture. There's like a big buffet of, when are we going to go when it comes to eschatology. And everyone's right. You can't argue with them. I try to avoid it, but to Kevin's point, like, everybody wants to go home from work early. Like, no one's going to be like, I'll volunteer, So, you want to act like there's going to be no rapture almost, but pray for like a pre-trib, hope for a pre-trib rapture, but act like there's going to be no rapture. Like, you should try to be saving as much people as possible, and for whatever reason, like, you can't evangelize, then be a good Christian as much as possible. Okay, so we talked about that. The dragon pursues the woman. So it talks about the serpent spewing water out of his mouth, like a flood after the woman. As we progress here with the chapter 13, chapter 14, 17, and 18, water is often used to describe like a sea of people. So it's nations, tribes, tongues, religions. In this case, I think the water represents people that are going to persecute the Jewish people. So he spews water out. And you can see that today, you've seen that in the past. I feel like every 5 years, there's at least 1 to 3 different wars or battles or events for the Jewish people that indicates that they're just constantly being persecuted. Whether it's at the Olympics, I think there was either in the 70s or in 80s, there was a hostage situation at the Olympics. The ongoing just warfare with Palestine. And then, of course, you have today with Iran and Iran's proxies. So just nonstop. So the water represents multitude of people, languages, nations, and religions, and in this case, because he's spewing it out at the woman, which represents the Jewish people, it is bad guys that are going to be after them. Okay, so pretty much we described everything in this picture, but the dragon with the 7 heads, 7 crowns, sorry, maybe this mistake, 7 diadems, and 10 horns. This verse here is similar to ones we're going to encounter in chapter 13, and it's hard talking about Revelation if you don't look back into the Old Testament. In particular, I'll just point out the book of Daniel. I mentioned Genesis, I mentioned Psalms, there's also Ezekiel and Isaiah. In particular, Daniel chapter 2 and chapter 7 is what we're going to start out at. So I'll just give a brief overview, and then we will jump into chapter 13, where we'll go into the book of Daniel and kind of break this out a little bit further. So there's 7 heads in this case. The 7 heads are 7 kingdoms. The 7 diadems are 7 kings. And the 10 horns represent a 10-nation confederacy that will rise in the last day. So, okay, why 7 crowns, or sorry, 7 diadems and 7 kings? That's in the book of Daniel. Why 10? What's the 10-nation confederacy? That's also in the book of Daniel. So let's go to chapter 13 now. And we're going to read verse 1 through 18. We'll read the whole chapter and then we'll go back. Okay, the beast from the sea. Then I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his 10 horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. Now the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. So they worshiped the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, who is able to make war with him?" And he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and he was given authority to continue for 42 months. Then he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, and those who dwell in heaven. And it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, tongue, and nation. All who dwell on the earth will worship him, whose names have not been written in the book of the life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. If anyone has an ear to hear, let him hear. He who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. Then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. And he exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. He performs great signs, so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And he deceives those who dwell on the earth by those signs which he granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who was wounded by the sword and lived. He was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their hand, on their right hand, or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Okay. So the first thing, the beast from the sea. The first beast is always going to be called the Antichrist. So he's rising up out of the sea. He has 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 crowns on his head. It kind of sounds like the dragon, the devil from the previous chapter, and it is and it isn't at the same time. So to understand, again, the dragon from the previous chapter and then the Antichrist in this chapter, let's start out with, let's go to Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. Chapter 2 and verse 31. Okay, so the setup here in chapter 2 is that the prophet Daniel, he's a prophet. He was exiled or brought to Babylon from Jerusalem, and he was put in Nebuchadnezzar's, court, because I'm guessing probably because they believed he was smart, or he had good looks, or a mixture of both, but he was brought in Nebuchadnezzar's court. And he, throughout the book of Daniel, kind of rises through the ranks. And in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar, who's the king of Babylon at the time, has this dream. And after the dream, he's very troubled. He can't sleep. He's very paranoid. So he gets all of his wise men together, and he goes, you guys need to interpret this dream. Oh yeah, and you need me to tell you the dream as well. And so all the wise men are like, we can't do this. This is impossible. We can't tell you what your dream is, Nebuchadnezzar. And so he goes, okay, I'm going to kill you all. So Daniel steps up and he's like, wait. Let's take a 10 here. Let me go pray. I'll find out from my God what your dream is and its interpretation. So he meditates, he prays, he finds out what the dream is, he finds its interpretation. And starting in verse 31, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partially of iron and partially of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which you struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became like a great mountain that filled the whole earth. That last verse there, the great mountain that fills the whole earth, that is Christ. That is Christ's kingdom. It's often referred to as a mountain. So each of these, oh yeah, this is a good one. That's the statue from the dream in Daniel 2. On the far right, you'll see the four beasts. That's Daniel 7. They parallel, but not quite, but we'll get to them. So each of these parts of the statue represent an empire. So with an empire, there's a kingdom and a notable king. With the Babylonian Empire, that's various ones, Nebuchadnezzar in this case. You have the Persian Empire, you have the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, and then you have the fifth one there, which we'll get into as we progress, but that's part of the feet. And how many toes do you normally have in your foot? You got 10 total, honey. So that ties back into the dragon and the first beast. That's the 10-nation confederacy. So each of these empires, starting with the top, kind of succeeded each one of them. The Persians, or Medo-Persian Empire, conquered the Babylonian Empire. The Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, conquered the other two above them, or the land that encompassed the other two combined. And then after the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire being the fourth one. Now at the time of John, and this will come into play, when he saw this vision, the angel's going to tell him that this empire still exists. This Roman Empire is, but will eventually die out. And the fifth one will become this revised Roman Empire. Now, there's also a theory going around the internet, of course, that the fourth kingdom isn't really the Roman Empire, it's the Islamic Empire, and that's because Rome didn't conquer all of what was the Greek Empire before, the Persian Empire before, and the Babylonian Empire before, basically all the way like past where we're at in modern day Iran. And I guess there's a point to that, but I don't think it really jives, because as you read through Daniel and as you read through Revelation, you begin to understand that the Islamic nations are part of a different prophecy where they go up against Israel. And that's where you get like the Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38, which we'll probably get into next week if I'm teaching or Kevin's teaching. So it's the Roman Empire. And it's important that it's the Roman Empire because this 10-nation confederacy springs forth from the Roman Empire, the remnants of it. A lot of people point to the European Union as being part of that. It's a possibility. So those are kind of like the main theories. So these are the 4 or 5 nations that are described in Daniel's dream. Now we're missing 2 of them. The last 2 come into play in the next couple of chapters in Revelation, but I'll go ahead and spoil it. It's the 2 nations preceding the Babylonian Empire, which are Assyria and which are Egypt. The other important thing about all of this is that all of these empires systematically persecuted the Jewish people. So you just can't pick, China is going to be the 5th or the 6th empire. Not really. They didn't really persecute the Jewish people. They persecute Muslims, but not the Jewish people yet, anyways. Okay, so I explained what the statue was in Daniel 2. Let's see here. Okay, let's jump to Daniel 7 now. So we talked about the image of gold. Now we're going to jump to Daniel 7, and let's do verses 1 through 7. Okay, so this is a different king. Daniel is still in Babylon. This is the vision of the 4 beasts. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. And the 4 great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second, like a bear, was raised up on one side, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings like a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So there you have 4 beasts, one of them, the last one, with 10 horns. Each of these seem to be, on the far right there, more kind of dreadful than the next one. And if you compare, those verses with the statue from Daniel's dream in chapter 2, you can kind of match up. The lion being the Babylonian Empire, Medo-Persian Empire, the bear, the leopard, the Greek Empire, just the leopard being very fast. Alexander conquered the known world by the time he was 32 or 33 years old. And then you have the Roman Empire, kind of this, amalgamation of different things put together, more dreadful than the other, and it has 10 horns. 10 horns parallel to the first beast coming out of the sea in Revelation 13. So, kind of continuing in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were the eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him, and thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. And I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, the little horn that popped up from the 10. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and giving to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. Okay, so I'll stop there. This vision continues. He's got 10 horns. Another little horn pops up from the 10 and strikes down 3 of the existing 10 horns. That little horn is the Antichrist. So he's speaking pompous words, much like the Antichrist will eventually do. And the 3 horns that were broken off from the 10, we'll get into it in Revelation 17. You have to think that eventually when the Antichrist creates his kingdom and he has his domain and he gets his power from Satan, the dragon, he probably has some infighting with the 10 existing nations, and he cuts them off. So you have to assume that there's probably going to be some infighting when this actually takes place. So we have kind of an explanation of the beast that comes out from Revelation 13. Let's see here. Continuing in Daniel. Yeah. So let's skip to chapter 7. We're already in chapter 7. And let's do verse 23 through 25. So verse 23. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it, and break it into pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. So again, going back to that little horn that broke off 3 of the other horns. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be giving into his hand for a time and half a time. So again, they're talking about 3.5 years. So hopefully it's kind of coming together a little bit here about what the first beast is. So let's jump back to Revelation 13 again. So the first beast that comes out has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. So the 10 heads correspond to 10 nations, 10 places. The 10 crowns are 10 kings. Now, whether these are European kings, these are kings in North America, South America, it's up for debate. A lot of people think it's Europe because it is this revival of the old Roman Empire. When I first talked a couple of weeks ago, I think it was the first or second Revelation teaching, talked about the early church, and I talked about the Roman emperors. And at a certain point, I think it was after Trajan, who extended the empire to its greatest, that's when Rome gradually began to shrink. And each Roman emperor, each Caesar, began to get more and more ridiculous, began to also persecute God's people, and just wanted the good old days when everybody would worship Caesar, when everybody would follow their rules. So I believe that, the 10 nations were going to arise somewhere out of the original Roman Empire. Whether you want to say it's kind of like, again, spread out between Europe and Central Asia, it's up for debate. So, okay, so we talked about the 10-nation confederacy and then the 7 heads. The 7 heads correspond to those old kingdoms that were destroyed, but as in Daniel 7 said, they were not utterly destroyed. God allows them to still linger about. And this is because the Antichrist is not only, as bad as Rome, but he's going to be as bad as Greece, bad as Persia, bad as Babylon, bad as Assyria, as bad as Egypt. And then the 10-nation confederacy, so 7, is going to go along with him on this. So hopefully it starts to kind of make more sense, those first couple of verses in chapter 13. And then the other important aspect of this is that, so the first beast out of the sea, the Antichrist, will get his power from Satan. I'm starting to think that this guy's going to be possessed by Satan, because again, in the previous chapter, Satan is cast down. He is on earth. So there's going to be a lot of very supernatural things going on that we probably haven't seen before. Again, hopefully we're all raptured and just looking at this or at the wedding feast and just, yeah. So you have to imagine that it's almost going to be the last hour or so of the first Ghostbusters movie, where there's just things flying around New York City, but much worse, and hopefully Bill Murray's in heaven, but I don't know. So this guy, I think the Antichrist is going to be almost possessed by Satan. And, through the first half of the tribulation, he's going to rise up, and then, he's going to make his appearance. Most people will say that, by then he will rebuild the third temple, or the third temple will already be built. He'll seat himself there. He will proclaim himself as God. And as in the gospel state, as soon as that happens, when you see the abomination of desolation, you need to flee into the wilderness. So hopefully there's, Jewish people that maybe read a Bible at that point and say, oh, wilderness, I hear it's Petra, let's go there. So they flee there. Okay. I think we pretty much killed the first beast here. Let's see here. He was given a mouth to speak great things and blasphemies. So that ties into Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7. So again, there's parallels between Revelation and the Old Testament. I encourage you to read those books if you haven't. In particular, Daniel. It helps you understand Revelation much more. Let's see here. So verse 10 in Revelation 13, he who leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He who kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Here's the patience and faith of the saints. I think this verse is kind of comforting those people of God to just let them know that God still has this under control. He still has God's people. It kind of reminds me of the, I forgot who said this, if this was Napoleon or somebody, he who lives by the sword will die by the sword. If you're going to commit sin, you're going to have to deal with it. But God's people, they're still my people. I understand, I'm letting this guy loose, but you know me, you know how this ends. There's a point to this. So that's kind of, again, the last sentence there. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. So they understand these things have to pass. Whether you are left behind and you convert, or again, worst case is that there is some sort of later on rapture. Hopefully not. The beast is mortally wounded. So it mentions that, and it says one of his heads is mortally wounded. I've heard 2 theories about this. It's the Antichrist himself that is mortally wounded in his head, and he comes back to life. Or it's one of the kings from the 10-nation confederacy that is mortally wounded, and the Antichrist, comes up and heals him. I think it's the former. I think it's, he is wounded and he resurrects himself, because once again, he is the Antichrist. He is the replacement, the false replacement for Christ. So people are going to look at this and marvel and say, who is like the beast? Who could wage war against him, as these verses say. So, that verse in chapter 13 that says, who is like the beast, it reminds me of Psalm 113, verse 5 through 6, where it says, who is like the Lord our God? So people are going to slowly begin this replacement religion centered around the Antichrist. And then in the preceding chapters, this is when we're going to start about talking about Babylon and the harlot. Babylon is it's both the physical place where the Antichrist lays his kingdom, and it's a symbolic one world religion or new world religion that's centered around the Antichrist, which people must obey, must pay homage to, as they did in 200, 100 AD, where it was long live Caesar or hail Caesar. Otherwise, you are killed. Let's continue. So Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Then I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had two horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon, and he exercises all authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose head was mortally wounded. He performs great signs so that he even makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. So the second beast that comes out of the earth, it says he has the appearance of the lamb. So he has this appearance of this gentle person. And the second beast is called the false prophet. A lot of times he's kind of like the Antichrist's hype man. Like he goes along with him, he promotes him, and some people think that he is almost like this already religious figure. Some people equate him even to like the Pope that comes along with the Antichrist and promotes him, promotes his religion, and also creates this image of the beast that is living and breathing. And, as we go through the book of Revelation, I'm sure like 50 years ago, people were like, well, buy and sell, with a chip in your hand, that's impossible. But nowadays, like creating an image that has the likeness of the beast that breathes is, I think, it could be possible with the way we're going with AI and robotics. I think, they're already like creating human-looking robotics to replace people in manufacturing industries. In particular, I hear about the automotive industry being affected by this. And then you have, I think it was Iran that created a robot and gave it citizenship. I think they were one of the first ones, ironically. I'd have to double check that. But, and again, this was like 5 years ago, and robots 5 years ago, the back of their heads were missing and they looked very plasticky. So eventually they're going to become more and more lifelike. As always, technology continues to accelerate, and who knows where we'll be in 2 or 3 years. So we have the false prophet, which also makes fire come down from heaven on earth in the sight of men. So who does that kind of remind you of? It kind of reminds you of Elijah. I think in first and Second Kings. I think in Second Kings, there's some king of Judah or Israel that's coming after him, and he makes fire come down. I think it's in one of the early verses in chapter 1. And you have to understand, this is going to look exactly like what a lot of people maybe heard in Sunday school, like when they were kids that are left behind. So along with like this just, delusionment, like there's going to be these like, oh, that's godlike, I should worship the beast and, his religion. So there's going to be a lot of deception, obviously, going on. Okay, and then last part of chapter 3 is the mark of the beast. This one's a hard one. I don't have any slides on it, but I do hear a theory that it is, one of the theories is that it's not necessarily a mark, it is just a symbol, and 666 kind of looks like two crossed Arabic swords, and then I think it's like the Arabic words for Allah is good. I've seen that online. I've heard it's, the actual like chip on your hand or on your forehead. And then there's another theory that says it's all symbolic. It's based on whether or not you obey or follow evil. And if you can, let's turn to Deuteronomy 11:18. Deuteronomy 11:18. Hopefully I got it right. Here we go. Okay. So here we have the law. We have different conditions of blessing and cursing. And this is talking about a condition of blessing in verse 18, chapter 11 again. Therefore, you shall lay up these words of mine in your heart and in your soul, and you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. Some people point to that verse and think of the mark of the beast being symbolic of following the beast, following evil, and not a physical mark. I'm of the more literal translation. Like I look at the Bible, and if it says, it's a mark, it's going to be a mark. And the other problem with that theory is that, it says you can't buy or sell unless you have this number, this mark. So, obviously, a couple of years ago in 2020, we had the COVID lockdown. A lot of people say like that was a test. So if you didn't get the shot, some people got fired, some people weren't allowed to return to work, some people weren't allowed to shop. You have to imagine that, but just hyped up, because by this time we are halfway, if not more, through the tribulation. We have obviously had some type of nuclear war, if not complete catastrophe with cosmic events, whether they are asteroids in the form of millstones coming from heaven, or it's man-made war that has killed half or a third, however you want to add it up, depending on the sequence of the seals, the bowls, and the trumpets. So at this point, we're desperate. And again, circling back to the early church, because I really think things are going to go kind of like full circle here, or very similar to it. I told the story about, I think it was Perpetua and Felicity in like the early 200s. Perpetua was a noble woman that had a child, that just had a child. Felicity was a slave that was pregnant. Perpetua was found out that she was a Christian. She was brought before a judge. She goes, yeah, I'm a Christian. And then they bring her dad with her child and say, think of the child. It's how far are you willing to go? Are you willing to starve in order to keep your salvation? That's what it's going to be like for hopefully the remnant, and not everyone, meaning that there's no rapture, but there is going to be a rapture. Sorry, I keep bringing that up because I'm like, we're waiting. Okay, all right. We're not. Chapter 14. We'll read all of this again. Chapter 14. Yeah, question.
In the latter part of 13, it says,
Yeah.
I saw angels flying in the midst of heaven, having
Yeah.
the everlasting gospel.
Yes.
To preach to them that dwell on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Why are there angels preaching and not us?
That's a good point. I guess, hopefully, again, yeah. So the question was, there are angels in heaven preaching the everlasting gospel. For one, we're going to be gone by that time. Well, the church will be raptured. And then the second reason is that, God wants everybody saved. And there's going to be a lot of people that haven't been contacted, that don't know Christianity at all. Like, there's going to be a couple of categories. There's going to be what we think of as like tribesmen on an uncontacted island or some part of Africa. There's going to be people that, are your and my age that, have went through most of their lives. They might be backsliding or backslidden, if that's a word, and haven't been raptured, or, didn't follow God, or were another religion, and they're going to look and they're going to see angels preaching the gospel, and they're going to be like, okay, this is real, this is ridiculous, I need to stop what I'm doing, not take the mark, and follow God. Because throughout these chapters, God keeps asking or knocking on that door for us to repent. The third reason is that, I feel like even if we had like the best evangelist still on earth that just, made a mistake and didn't get raptured for whatever reason, even if we had the best evangelist, there's nothing better than God's own angels flying around giving the gospel. Nothing will drive it home better than that. And I forgot the last one is, I'm assuming there's going to be like a lot of children or teenagers that were at the age of accountability, that, were born into a Muslim family and just didn't have the chance or didn't have the opportunity to, be a Christian or follow Christ. It's very interesting is that you've talked about this a lot as well, is that, we don't get to choose our parents. And that's true universally. But what's even scarier is that we don't get to choose who we're born to and where we're born to. So I just think about like my life with Christ and everything, and I'm like, wow, I kind of regret that, or that was great. And then either this is my soul or Holy Spirit reminding me like how great God is that what if you were born in like the middle of the Algerian desert to an Arab Islamic family? I'd be like, well, it'd be slim picking. It'd be very, very hard, if not impossible, for God's true word to reach me. And again, that's why God sends his angels. Yep. So very good question. Sorry I skipped that. Chapter 14. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a great voice from heaven, like the voice of many waters, and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as if it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from earth. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. They are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These are redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made the heaven and the earth, the sea and the springs of water." And another angel followed, saying, "Babylon is fallen, the great city, because she has made all the nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast and his image and receives the mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they shall have no rest, day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes," says the Spirit, "that they may have rest from their labors and their works follow them." Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he sat on the cloud and thrust his sickle into the earth, and it was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And the other angel came out of the altar, who had power over fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him who had a sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in your sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs, which is about 200 miles. Okay, circling back to verse 1. So the 144,000, they're first introduced in chapter 7. They're kind of God's Jewish super soldiers that evangelize, I want to say primarily the Jewish people, but if any Gentiles happen to bump into them, I'm sure they would get converted as well. And they say that the 144,000 are with God, and God is standing on Mount Zion. Mount Zion is in Jerusalem. It is not the same as the Mount of Olives. So keep that in mind when you want to reference Matthew or Acts chapter 1, where it talks about God ascending from the Mount of Olives, and the angel states that he's going to descend from the same area. You don't need to fret. So, and that's Acts chapter 1, verse 9 through 12. It's possible that the 144,000 in this chapter are deceased and God is taking them up. But I mean, there's interpretations either way. But I guess it wouldn't make sense that they would be on earth and they're singing a new song with God, because I kind of interpret that as like, they're at this everlasting peace and they're singing this new song in heaven or in the spiritual realm with God. But again, open to interpretation. And then, so we get through the angel flying in the midst of heaven with the everlasting gospel, preaching to the earth, getting the last bit of people saved. This is probably the final and the last great harvest that the earth will have until the new earth and the new heaven will be created later. And then we have the angel saying, Babylon, Babylon is fallen. As I said before, Babylon is both a physical place kind of south of Iraq's capital, and is also going to be, the beast's or the Antichrist's kingdom. Some people believe that Babylon is more symbolic, that the Antichrist could put his kingdom in Rome or in Paris or otherwhere. I think when he rises up, he's eventually going to station himself physically in Babylon, because again it's going full circle here, and much like we were talking about Iran. Iran is near Dubai, and Dubai, they've actually created a lot of these man-made islands in the shape of countries and states, and they've developed this big great city in a couple of years. So it's possible. And again, the world is going to be in a state where it's very utterly destroyed. There's obviously going to be global conflict. So maybe it just so happens that Babylon, this currently abandoned city, is going to be rebuilt by him and just be a place for demons and the Antichrist's followers. So verses 9 through 11 talk about what you shouldn't do during the tribulation. And there's a couple of words I wanted to point out here. Depending on what translation of the Bible you have, I have New King James here. It says, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God. That first word, wrath, in the Greek is thumos, which is more of a kind of an outburst of anger. So this is this outburst of anger from God, but it kind of, the word thumos anyways, it says it quickly subsides. However, if you continue in verse 10, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his, capital H, indignation. A couple of other translations have anger, others have wrath again. That other word there, in this case for the New King James, indignation, is orge, which is a long-lasting, enduring anger towards someone or something that is based on extended exposure. In parentheses, I have unrepentance. So it's this anger that keeps building and building. You know, you're not repenting, you're not repenting. Okay, you took the mark, then my full anger is being poured out into you. And then continuing on, he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of his holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. And they shall have no rest day or night who worship the beast and his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. This verse here, when we get to like the very end, when we call the white throne judgment, where the living and the dead are judged, who are not in Christ, there's two different theories here. There's there are probably multiple, but I'll point out two. There's the theory that post-white throne judgment, when they're thrown into the fire, they just cease to exist. That's the annihilation part. There's another theory, the more traditional one, which is where they get thrown into hell or Gehenna or this new like realm in the abyss where they're tormented for forever and ever. In this case, this verse seems to imply that in the presence of God and in the presence of the Lamb, they are tormented. So almost seems like in heaven there's going to be this great pit with a lot of smoke coming up, and as we walk by, it's almost going to be like a memorial or a reminder for us that this happened, this existed. But there's a couple of recants on that, meaning like, well, no, it can't be that because it doesn't make sense. We're in heaven. Why would we look at that and we would feel sad? And it doesn't. There's a couple of different theories on that, whether or not that's true. Let's see. And then verse 13, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. So, at this point, the people that do convert to Christianity, they're probably in for torment in Babylon or in the beast's kingdom in some shape or form. So I think that's why that verse is there, is that at that point, like if you're just able to follow Christ and not take the mark, like it's a miracle that you made it in time. But it's also kind of like, you're obviously very strong because you have made it this far, you've endured without recanting, without falling away. And then the earth's harvest. So in verse 14 through 16, you have this harvest of Jesus' followers. And then in verse 17 through 20, you have the harvest of, my Bible says, the grapes of wrath. So these are the people that didn't follow Christ. And so this is almost fast forwarding, because Revelation does that a lot. It fast forwards, it rewinds. So 17 through 20 imply that there is some sort of like battle, quick battle that takes place. And all of these bad seeds or bad grapes that come up against the Lamb, that come up against God's people. In this case, they're probably outside of Jerusalem, because verse 20 says the winepress was trampled outside of the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 200 miles. So it's obviously, keeping with the grape metaphor here, a lot of grapes, enough to spread 200 miles of blood. So it's a massacre. Battle of Armageddon, yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is all of chapter 14. I'm going to stop there, and then I will pick up chapter 17 next week. Chapter 15 and 16, Kevin already went through. Chapter 15 is the prelude to the bowl judgments, and chapter 16 is the bowl judgments themselves. So there's 7 bowls. They kind of parallel the 7 plagues of Egypt, but in kind of a more like, current, in current time. And then by the time we get to chapter 17, we'll talk more about the beast system and essentially the one world religion, which chapter 17 starts out with the scarlet woman and the scarlet beast. The beast is the Antichrist, and the woman or the harlot rides on the beast, the Antichrist, which represents that false religion. Okay, so see you next week.